Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jashodanandana Brajajana Randhana. Yashodanandana Brajajana Randhana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parujaka Ashtotar the Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parujaka Ashtotar the Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, the Samaveta Bhaktabrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Narayanam Namaskritya Narang Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudidayet. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, we should offer our respectful obeisances unto Lord Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, unto Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mara Saraswati, the goddess of learning, unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author, and unto Srila Prabhupada, the translator, commentator, and our spiritual master. Nashta Prayesha Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyuttama Shloke Bhaktim Bhavati Naishtiki. By regular attendance in classes on Srimad Bhagavatam and by rendering devotional service to the pure devotee, all that is inauspicious within the heart is destroyed almost to nil, and loving devotion to the Supreme Lord, who is glorified in transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 8th day of October 2021 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We are in Canto 5 entitled, The Creative Impetus, Chapter 5, Lord Rishabhdev's Teachings to His Sons. Text number 19. Idam shariram mamado vibhavyam sattvam hime vidiyam yatra dharma prishte kvitome yada dharma arad ato himam vishabham prahararyaha idam shariram mamado vibhavyam sattvam hime vidiyam yatra dharma prishte krito me yada dharma arad ato himam vishabham prahararyaha idam shariram mamado vibhavyam sattvam hime vidiyam yatra dharma prishte krito me yada dharma arad ato himam vishabham prahararyaha idam shariram mamado vibhavyam sattvam hime vidiyam yatra dharma prishte krito me yada dharma arad ato himam vishabham prahararyaha idam shariram mamado vibhavyam sattvam hime vidiyam yatra dharma prishte krito me yada dharma arad ato himam vishabham prahararyaha idam shariram mamado vibhavyam sattvam hime vidiyam yatra dharma prishte krito me yada dharma arad ato himam vishabham prahararyaha idam shariram mamado vibhavyam sattvam hime vidiyam yatra dharma prishte krito me yada dharma arad ato himam vishabham prahararyaha. Anyone in Zoom land? Jessica?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Okay, go.
1 second.
Who's that?
Idam sariram mama durvibhavam
Idam shariram mama durvibhavyam
sattvam hidam yatra dharma
sattvam hime vidiyam yatra dharma
prishte krito me yad adharma arto
prishte krito me yad dharma arad
ato himam rashabham prahararyaha
ato himam vishabham prahararyaha. Word meanings. Idam, this. Shariram, transcendental body. Sachit Ananda Vigraha. Mama, my. Durvibhavyam, inconceivable. Sattvam, with no tinge of the material modes of nature. He, indeed. Me, my. Vidiyam, heart. Yatra, wherein. Dharmaha, the real platform of religion. Bhakti Yoga. Prishte, on the back. Kritaha, made. Me, by me. Yat, because. Adharmaha, irreligion. Arat, far away. Ataha, Therefore, he, indeed, Mam, me, Vishabham, the best of the living beings, Prahu, call, Aryaha, those who are advanced in spiritual life, or the respectable superiors. Okay. So Lord Rishabhadev continues to address his sons and others. My transcendental body, Satchidananda Vigraha, looks exactly like a human form, but it is not a material human body. It is inconceivable. I am not forced by nature to accept a particular type of body. I take on a body by my own sweet will. My heart is also spiritual, and I also think of the welfare of my devotees. Therefore, within my heart can be found the process of devotional service, which is meant for the devotees. Far from my heart have I abandoned irreligion, or dharma, and non-devotional activities. They do not appeal to me. Due to all these transcendental qualities, people generally pray to me as Rishabhadev, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the best of all living entities. Srila Prabhupada's purport. In this verse, the words idam shariram mamador vibhavyam are very significant. Generally, we experience two energies, material energy and spiritual energy. We have some experience of the material energy, earth, water, air, fire, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. Because in the material world, everyone's body is composed of these elements. Within the material body is the spirit soul, but we cannot see it with the material eyes. When we see a body full of spiritual energy, it is very difficult for us to understand how the spiritual energy can have a body. It is said that Lord Rishabhadev's body is completely spiritual. Therefore, for a materialistic person, it is very difficult to understand. For a materialistic person, the completely spiritual body is inconceivable. We have to accept the version of the Vedas when our experimental perception cannot understand a subject. As stated in the Brahma Samhita, Ishwarak Parama Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha. The Supreme Lord has a body with form, but that body is not composed of material elements. It is made of spiritual bliss, eternity, and living force. By the inconceivable energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Lord can appear before us in his original spiritual body. But because we have no experience of the spiritual body, we are sometimes bewildered and see the form of the Lord as material. The Mayavadi philosophers are completely unable to conceive of a spiritual body. They say that the spirit is always impersonal, and whenever they see something personal, they take it for granted that it is material. In the Bhagavad Gita 9:11, it is said, Avajananti mamudha manushim tanamashritam Padam Bhav Majananto Mama Bhuta Maheshwaram. Now I'm going to read the revised translation. Fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature as the Supreme Lord of all that be. Unintelligent people think that the Supreme Lord accepts a body composed of the material energy. We can easily understand the material body, but we cannot understand the spiritual body. Therefore, Rishabhadev says, Idam shariram mamadur vibhavyam, which means this body of mine is inconceivable. In the spiritual world, everyone has a spiritual body. There is no conception of material existence there. In the spiritual world, there is only service and the receiving of service. There is only sevya, seva, and sevaka. The person served, the process of service, and the servant. These three items are completely spiritual, and therefore the spiritual world is called absolute. There's no tinge of material contamination there. Being completely transcendental to the material conception, Lord Rishabhadev states that his heart is composed of dharma. Dharma is explained in the Bhagavad Gita 1866. Sarvan dharmam parityaja, mamekam sharanam braja. In the spiritual world, which means give up all dharmas and surrender only unto me. In the spiritual world, every living entity is surrendered to the Supreme Lord and is completely on the spiritual platform. Although there are servitors, the served and service, all are spiritual and variegated. At the present moment, due to our material conception, everything is durvibhavya, inconceivable. Being the supreme, the Lord is called Rishabha, the best. In terms of the Vedic language, Nityo Nityanam, we are also spiritual, but we are subordinate. Krishna, the Supreme Lord, is the foremost living entity. The word Rishabha means the chief or the supreme, and indicates the supreme being or God himself. Om Jnana Timarandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So, Lord Rishabdev here is speaking all about his own existence. Because, as we will soon read, when Rishabdev gets off the seat and finally he takes sannyas, so to speak, that his activities are unique amongst all incarnations of Godhead. He takes the role of a complete avaduta, and he wanders around in different places, and people don't recognize him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And they sometimes berate him, they insult him in so many different ways. And he remains completely equipoised. So, he's emphasizing here that my body looks exactly like a human body, but it's not. It's completely Satchidananda Vigraha, transcendental. Now, Srila Prabhupada often quotes this little analogy, which is very instructive. The frog in the well. And it's worth reiterating that one, because it has to do with our process of gaining knowledge and how we see ourselves in the world because of that, the limits of that process. So, once there was a well that was dug fairly near the ocean, say the Pacific Ocean here, maybe in one of the parks here. And in that well, there lived a colony of frogs. And there was the senior frog, the elder frog, who was also known as the wisest frog. He knew everything there was to know about that well, the size of it, the little creatures that lived there besides the frogs, everything. So he was understood as a professor of the well. So one day, an exceptionally athletic frog was able to jump out of the well. And he said, jumping here and there, he made his way down to the beach, Pacific Beach. And he went, and suddenly he encountered the Pacific Ocean. The same water was there that he had experienced in the well, but the size was inconceivable. It was just way beyond anything he'd seen before. So he hurried back to the well, jumped in, and with great eagerness, he wanted to report what he found to the Professor Frog. So he said, I was exploring and I found a body of water way bigger than this well. And so the Professor Frog was thinking, well, way bigger, okay, maybe it's 5 times bigger, 10 times bigger. He said, so he was asking the explorer. He says, was it 10 feet across? And the frog said, no, you don't understand, way bigger. Oh, 20 feet, 100 feet? That's practically inconceivable. And so Prabhupada tells the story sometimes that the frog kept puffing himself up because he thought he had figured everything out, and finally he burst. The point is that within the realm of what he knew, there was no way of understanding the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean or anything of that size. His whole world was the well. And so therefore everything he thought was real and in terms of his dimensions and everything was confined to the well. Similarly, in the material consciousness, we're confined to the limits of what we can perceive, which is matter. We can understand some things about because we can expand or amplify our senses. We have our eyes, but you can also have microscopes, so you can see many more things that are very tiny. I remember as I was growing up, they invented the electron microscope sometime in the 60s, early 60s maybe or something. And suddenly a whole new world opened up. They thought, when I learned science in 8th grade, 9th grade, like that, there were 3 particles in the atom. There was the neutron, which is always in the middle, right, in the nucleus, and then there was the protons, which were also in the nucleus, and then there were the electrons going around, and that was it. That was it. Then when they got into that, they had the electron microscopes coupled with the cyclotrons and the atom smashers. Suddenly, all these other particles became manifest. The muons and the quarks and all these different things. Yeah. So, by expanding our ability to perceive, then our whole understanding of what's real and what's going on in the world expands. With material senses and material mind, we cannot perceive spirit directly. Prabhupada makes that point here. We're all combinations of spirit and matter, and it doesn't take, that much intelligence to understand those 8 different elements, progressively more subtle. Right in the Bhagavad Gita, Bhuma, Apo, Anano, Vayu. Earth, water, fire, air, those are obvious. Ether is a little more difficult. And somebody asked me in the class, what is ether? Ether is the space that everything exists in. And then more subtle than that is the mind, which nobody can see, but everybody agrees exists, right? And then the intelligence, even more fine, the process of discrimination, which is a special distinguishing factor of human beings as opposed to lower animals. And then finally there's the ego, now, which is the sense of self. And it's that ego that we call false ego, in which induces us to identify with our specific body, both gross and subtle, as ourselves. That is the interface between spirit and matter. In the spiritual world, there's ego, but there's no false ego. False ego means you're identifying with that which you are not. And that's practically universal, except for devotees. And you would say that even the impersonalists, they're able to understand that they're spirit. But what they don't understand, because they don't have access, or they don't believe, let's say it that way, they don't have faith in the Vedic Shastras that are describing the personality of Godhead and the form and qualities and senses of even the spirit, the living entity as well. So Prabhupada has a wonderful explanation in the 4th chapter, text 10 of the Bhagavad Gita. Forget the, Vitaraga, thank you. Vitaraga bhaya krodha manmayamam pashada bhavo jnana tapasa putamad bhavamagata. Thank you. So this phrase Vitaraga bhaya krodha appears several times in Bhagavad Gita. It means being free from Vita, attachment, fear, and anger. Many in the past have become purified by worship me and austerities, and thus they've attained my nature. So in that purport, Prabhupada, very fascinating. He takes these 3 words and he describes how each one of them describes a different category of person who is blocked from understanding Krishna. And for the impersonalists, it's fear, bhaya, because they make the mistake of thinking that a body means a material body. And so when the prospect of having a body in perfection, spiritual body, comes up, they say, no. That's the imperfection. And they even say it about Krishna. That Krishna as derived from Brahman. And when God comes to this world, he takes on a material body. Completely messed up. And because they deride the form of God, they're known as offenders. Avajananti ma mudha, and fools. Krishna says right in the Bhagavad Gita, in 9th chapter, Avajananti ma mudha manushim tanamashratam padam bhav majanato mama bhuta maheshwaram. I think that's it, right? I gotta review these shlokas. So avajananti means they deride. The foolish materialists and impersonalists, they deride me when I appear as a human form. Manushim dehamasitaha. They don't understand my supreme nature. This is what quoted in this purport, right? There it is. They do not know my transcendental nature as the supreme Lord of all that be. So this is the fatal mistake of the Mayavadis. That's why they can never enter into the house of Bhakti. They have no faith in the form, qualities, personality, activities of the Lord. They think these are all a derivative and that they're Maya. I mean, can you imagine? It's so painful to just think. And this is why Lord Chaitanya, they're all offenders. That we come before the deities and our mentality is, oh, they're just statues. They're just statues so those sentimental bhaktas can have something to meditate on. The real thing is Gyan. I associated with one of these Mayavadis. I was saved by devotees. But he directly said that Bhakti is just for the emotional masses. The real transcendentalists, they go for the Gyan, the knowledge of Brahman. Can you imagine? Doesn't it just make your skin crawl? Because our whole activities, our whole, kirtan, everything, is based on the faith that, Krishna exists. Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha. Krishna says, right in the Brahma is describing Krishna, his realization, that the supreme controller, the supreme God, is Krishna, who has a form composed of eternity, bliss, and knowledge, is real. And he has no beginning, he's eternal, he's the source of everything. Adi, his name is Govinda, therefore he has Leela, he pleases the cows, he's a coward boy. Govinda, Adi Govinda, Sarva Karana Karanam, and he's the source of all, of everything. That's, as Krishna says directly in the Bhagavad Gita. So Rishabdev is describing that's me, In other words, I am manifestation. I am the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's what people call me, the best. Rishabha means the supermost. And it's important to remember that, because I'm not going to mention this particular pastime, but every year, as you may have remembered, during April, May, I disappear in the morning program because I've got this marathon to edit these offerings to Srila Prabhupada, homages for the Vyasa Puja book. So it's a BBT book, and we can't put anything in the BBT book that contradicts Prabhupada's Siddhanta. That's it. And we had one offering submitted, I'm not going to say by who, where they were trying to argue that Lord Rishabdev and Kapila Dev were not actually the Bhagavan. And this whole verse is about that, and we've read so much in, and yet that's what it was arguing, quoting this, quoting that. And I said, I went back to that individual. I said, we can't have this. It's I gave some of the quotes, and so they withdrew the offering. They were so. Anyway, so that's and we need to be vigilant of our own mentality, of not understanding the transcendental nature of the holy name, that the holy name is not different from Krishna, and the deity is the same as Krishna. This is part of what it means to come out of our material mentality and to enter into the spiritual understanding of Krishna. That out of his mercy, he deigns to come in these forms that we can hear as the holy name and that we can see and serve as the deities. And we read, it helps to read some of the wonderful stories, like in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Shakshi Gopal, the witness Gopal who walked miles and hundreds of miles to serve, to protect one of his devotees from. Anyway, there's a whole dispute about whether he had promised or not promised to give his daughter to this wonderful Brahmin who had accompanied him to Vrindavan. And so he did come there and gave testimony, and so everything was resolved that way. Or Shira Chora Gopinath, who responded to Madhavendra Puri by stealing a pot of sweet rice for him. So so all of these reciprocations are there, and we've had stories in our own contemporaries. The deities in Mayapur, some of the Jagannath deities, when they gave us a temple, and what was happening was that Jayapataka Maharaj didn't want us to start the seva for the deities until they'd actually signed over the land, because once you start the seva, you can't stop it and then you wouldn't have to give the temple, and then we would be, we'd be doing all the seva, but not actually have the temple. So there was an interim there where they weren't being offered anything, any prasadam, and the negotiations were going on. And then the pujaris who had the dream, like 3 or 4 devotees had the same dream. I think Panchkajandri, what? Yeah. And they had the same dream that the deities were coming over the field so that they could get some of the prasadam off the Radhamadava, the deities in Mayapur, installed deities. They were appearing. Does that ever happen where you have the exact same dream? No. They were showing that, we're real, So these are wonderful stories. And Prabhupada says, yes, sometimes the deity will talk to you, when you're pure enough and you can hear. So what to speak of the holy name? The holy name we can experience. We haven't experienced that the complete non-difference of the holy name with Krishna, but we certainly can experience the influence on our own lives. That the whole change of consciousness takes place, and you're able to have faith in so many of these things which are otherwise inconceivable, because Krishna is speaking, is affecting you from within the heart. The more that you're chanting nicely and concentrating and hearing, So, this whole purport is about the inconceivable nature. Prabhupada says that's such an important word. Idam shariram mama durvibhavyam. That this body of mine is inconceivable. So this acceptance of the inconceivable as real is an essential element for really maintaining our faith and taking the knowledge and putting it to practice. Because so many things we're confronted with that just seem, really? I mean, I remember the 5th canto when it came out, and it was all of this geography, and there's a mountain over there that's actually smaller at the bottom and bigger at the top, and it's, I don't know how many, 800,000 miles tall, and it's supposed to be visible, and you can see it, so many things. But we have to think, well, you can't, as Krishna says, even the soul is inconceivable and unbelievable to people who are, not experienced at all. What to speak of all of these things that Krishna's creation and Krishna himself. So then another point here is about Dharma. That Mishabdev is saying that Dharma is in my heart, and our Dharma is on the back. This is some because sometimes people ask, well, does Krishna also produce evil? Is he the source of? He's the source of everything. He's also the source of evil. And the answer is yes, although to him it's not evil. This is simply the way the world works, that when you allow yourself to be controlled by the modes of nature, you can enter into a whole demonic mentality. And it's interesting, isn't it, that in Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, Hiranyakashipu, is tormenting his son. Horrible, horrible, horrible. But then we remember, he's Jaya Vijay. He's just an attendant of Vaikuntha that has been covered over and given this mentality so that Krishna can come in this extraordinary form and kill him and save Prahlad, and Prahlad can offer the prayers. In other words, it's all being engineered, and Krishna is the source of it all. It's not that it is difficult to understand how evil can come from God, but think of it as evil is a impurity that takes us away from God, and that can be changed. The evil can become saintly. We see it in more modern days with Jagai Madai and so many others, right? And with some contemporary movement. That was Prabhupada's whole basis of why he felt he could preach. The same famous verse, I'm sure you know this one, Vijay Prabhu. Kirata hunanda pulinda pulkisha abir shumba jabana kasharya yenye papa yadapasha yashaya shudnyanti tasmai papa vishnave namaha. It's kind of an expansion on Krishna's statement at the end of the 9th chapter. Mami parta vipashita yepisyu papa yonaya striyo vaishastata shudas tepi yanti padam gatim. That even those who are born in sinful families or have been sinful themselves, if they take shelter of me, he gives others who are normally not thought of to be eligible to be transcendental. He mentions women there, Vaishyas, Shudras, doesn't matter who you are. If you take shelter of Krishna, you attain him in the spiritual world. And this other verse talks about those who live far from India, far from Bharatavarsha, outcasts, They have no contact with the Vedic culture. If they take shelter of someone who's taken shelter of Krishna, they can become purified and then go back to guided. And that's why we're all sitting here. Prabhupada had that faith that there are receptive people, even though they may be performing so many adharmic activities. If they have the qualification of being a little receptive to the message, and they're willing to try the chanting of Hare Krishna, then they can be purified. And that's how he started this movement. That's how the movement is going on. So Prabhupada was such a strong preacher and such a perfect example of remaining transcendental, even in the midst of impure environments. I always have this image of him in New York, walking up Broadway in Times Square, of all places, which I lived in Manhattan, or I knew Manhattan very well. The pornography movies on either side and all this and what's going on the street. And there's Prabhupada, purity personified, with books he's carrying, his books, looking for bookstores. He can put them in the bookstores. And I don't think there was any street book distribution going on. But the point was, he was floating like a lotus on a river, He wasn't affected because he was completely meditating on Krishna within. He was doing Krishna's most valuable service. Totally protected. So we can also experience that protection, and even in the fight stage we can experience it. If our sadhana is strong, then when two kinds of things threaten you, right? There's the allurements for enjoyment, and there's the threats of danger. And in both of those we have to remain dhira, undisturbed, to be confident of Krishna's protection. It's not easy, on either side. We have wonderful examples. We just heard about Haridas Thakur's disappearance. He's a great example of both sides. And Prahlad, of course, perfect example. To remain fearless when everyone else is freaking out and have lost their composure. Not easy. But that's the for someone who's fixed on the spiritual platform, Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma, Nashochati Nakangshati, is by nature joyful and experiencing transcendental bliss, not lamenting for anything lost, and not hankering for anything not gained, because you already have the most valuable thing, Krishna, in your heart. And so that's understanding our spiritual nature, and that is our real nature. That this is all just a costume. We're like in a big costume ball, or coming up on Halloween. I remember my story. What grade was I in? 3rd grade, 2nd grade? Everyone would dress up on Halloween or whatever the day's closest in a costume. So one of my classmates, a boy, had dressed up so perfectly that no one could tell who he was. The mask, the costume. He wasn't saying anything. That was the thing. That usually gives you away, And who is that? Who is that? Who is that? And so the danger, the carry the analogy further. The costume ball. You're in a costume ball, and then you somehow have an accident. You fall down and you hit your head, and you get amnesia. And who am I? Who am I? You look in the mirror. Oh, I'm John Wayne, or I'm whatever. In other words, you start identifying with all you have, which is your body, which is your costume. So we've been wearing this costume. Vasangsi Janani Yata Vihaya. Krishna says it's just transmigration, just like giving up an old set of clothes and taking on a new set of clothes. You're not the clothes, but if that's all you know, you're going to identify yourself with those clothes. And from that misidentification comes all the problems in the material world. Just like now in America, racism. It's always been there. Now it's becoming so obvious and prominent. People are completely obsessed with that. And it's crazy. I mean, the things that you'll do because you don't really consider those who are a different color to be human, or as human as you anyway. It's horrible. These are the ramifications of that. Whereas as a devotee, especially as the movement, grew, and everybody, you're in an ashram and there's all backgrounds and colors and everything, and you all have a kirtan, and there's no problem. Even the Varna ashram designations disappear. Oh, he's a Kshatriya, and he's a Brahmin, No, it says Hare Krishna, Hare Bol. You know what I'm saying? So that's what Krishna consciousness really is that yes, you don't just leave your body, but you learn to use it as a tool for connecting you, the soul, to Krishna. There's so many millions of things you can hear. What's the verse? Those who do not see, who do not understand the truth of the self, they have millions and millions of things to hear about besides Krishna. The internet is a huge Tower of Babel. And now, one of the biggest problems now is there's all this misinformation and disinformation going out on the internet, and certain people want to believe this, and then they're given an argument to believe all kinds of stuff. I'm not going to get into details. And it's like Maya with a megaphone. Maya amplified 100 million. In other words, Maya being bewildering your mind and getting you to believe things that are false. Main which is this: I am the body, aham mameti, I and mine, the essence of the false ego. I am this body, and things related to this body are mine. See, my wife, my money, my kid, my house, my country, and that's just the depths of illusion. It leads to suffering. Nunam pramata kurade vikarma. One of his early, very famous verses. That those who are simply engaged in sense gratification, which is what this means, they're mad, very mad, pramata, because they're just ensuring a lot of suffering. I like to point out that sense gratification is very fleeting, and the pleasure that you can derive from it is very limited. So, and oftentimes the austerities you have to go are very extreme in order to be able to enjoy a little sense gratification, working so hard, making so much money, and everything. And ultimately, you're assuring in your next life a lot of suffering. We're going to read about these hells. It'll probably make your hair stand up. It's good. It's probably before we do, you can shave up, so you don't have so much. And but Krishna consciousness, let's be honest, the austerities are pretty minimal, compared to what we read about, what we're going to read about Rishabdev. But they're there. There's some austerity. But pretty soon, you start to enjoy spiritual pleasure, which makes you realize, oh, the austerities are that's not so bad, And the future is extremely bright. You come to the point of going back to Godhead, there's no austerity there. It's just Satchidananda, bliss for eternity. That's the faith we have. So here you have your alternative as a human being. Stay within the bodily concept and, try to enjoy your senses, and get the flickering happiness, maya sukhaya, illusory happiness, and ensure all kinds of suffering. Probably, if you don't meet a devotee and do a little service in a subhuman life form. Or, as Rishabdeva says in his very first instruction, undertake divine austerities which are part of bhakti, purify the existence so that you become eligible to enjoy Brahma Saukya, spiritual happiness. And we know that the ultimate spiritual happiness is direct service. The wonderful analysis of seva, the sevaka, and the sevya. The object of service, the service itself, and the servant. That's what's going on in the spiritual world. And it's open. No more suffering, just varieties of enjoyment in relation to Krishna. So what makes the most sense to invest your time and energy in? Obviously, Krishna consciousness, but it has to be on the basis of faith. It all depends on faith, because we can't see Krishna directly now. So that's what these classes are for. That's what the association with realized souls like Srila Prabhupada are for. It gives you knowledge and for a foundation for your faith, so that when you act, you're confident that you're moving toward perfection. I was studying these two words. One of the first verses describing the demons in chapter 16, after they have a nice list of transcendental qualities. Then he starts describing the demons. Pravitting chanabritting cha janana viradasada. What is it? They don't know what is to be done, and they don't know how to refrain from doing what they shouldn't do. That's nivritti. Both of those are there. They're not clean. They don't like that. They don't know the proper activity. So pravrittim is the things that we do. Just like we say, what is the 6 elements of surrender? Anukulyasya sankalpa, pratikulyasya bhajanam. Those are the first 2. Is that having a willpower, accepting those things which are favorable for devotional service, those activities and everything else, and giving up those things which are unfavorable. These are Prabhupada's famous, when you read his books, if you come across the statement of rules and regulations. Regulations are the don'ts, like the regulatives principles. Rules are what you should do. Those are the anukulyasya sankalpa. So they correspond perfectly to pravritti, nivritti. Pravritti means all the things you learn and understand you should do and you actually do. And nivritti means avoiding the things that you shouldn't do. They're both positive elements. It's not that one is positive, one is negative. One is doing the right thing and the other is avoiding the bad things. So that is the essence of entering into the process of devotional service, is that by faith, by association, by friendship with a devotee, somehow or other, the seed of bhakti is planted. I'm just reading now, chapter 19, Madhya Lila, where Lord Chaitanya teaches Rupa Goswami, and he has his famous verse, those who know it, Brahmanda Brahmadekon, Bhagyavan Jeev, Guru Krishna Pasare Pai, Bhakti Lata Bij. We're wandering up and down in different universes, different species. Brahmanda, Brahmate means to wander. Brahmanda's universe. The fortunate soul, by the mercy of Guru and Krishna, gets the seed of devotional service, the seed of the creeper of devotion, planted in the heart. Now Prabhupada says in that purport to that particular verse, what does that seed consist of? Precisely this, the rules and the regulations of bhakti. You get the instruction about how to perform bhakti, and the essential element, the faith, that this is what you should do. That at least you should try it, accepting these things and giving up these things, I'll give it up at least for a time, In other words, you're ready you're receptive to entering the process of devotional service. So by association, sadhu sangha, shraddha, little faith, then ado shraddha tatak sadhu sangha, association with devotees, then taking up the process, which means pravritti nivritti. And then the anartha nivritti can start, there. And so all of these are anarthas. These are superfluous. It's all of the body itself, the misconceptions, the attachment to the doubts, the attachment to all these different things, the fears. All of that is superfluous to the soul. These are anarthas. And they're, or abhadras is another word, the same. They cleanse the way. They're cleansed away by the process of devotional service. You become more and more enthused, and a ruchi comes. It's not like you have to go through the stages. You don't get any ruchi until there's ruchi even in the first part. Some taste is developing, and when you pursue that more and more, you forget about all the other ruchis. There's no material taste anymore. You become distasteful. That's really what vairagya means, having distaste for anything besides Krishna. That's vairagya. So we've covered a bunch of little portions here, but this is a very nice. Rishabhdev is revealing his divinity again, and there's a lot of good points in this purport. Any discussion?
Hare Krishna.
Hold on a minute, Vijay. Krishna Prabhu. We have a
Yes, I can wait.
So just on a side note, you mentioned that devotee, he sent an offering about Rishabhadev and Kapiladev not being Bhagavan or something like that. What was the purpose of him bringing that up? Because it seems like there must have been some purpose for him.
The purpose was, that's a good question. He was Prabhupada is accepted really as Avesh, Shakti Avesh. And what he was trying to prove was that Kapiladev and Rishabhadev were also Avesh. They're also Shakti Avesh, although they may be, but that's not what Prabhupada taught, and it's not, it doesn't. So in other words, saying, oh, Prabhupada is on the level of Kapila Dev and Shabdev and stuff like that. He was trying to kind of mix him up. Yeah. But I'll give you a little more insight into it if you're interested. But the offering was not printed, obviously. You had something. Okay, first, Daniel, you have something? No, he was just carrying it. He was just... Okay, a couple of minutes, BJ. Go ahead.
Just a comment and a question. The comment was that distaste, that's a nice concept. As we develop a higher taste, we have distaste for these other things. How easy is it to renounce or turn away from these things which entrap us? You know, the lure of sense enjoyment, or, you know,
exactly.
Not following the regulations, or the fear of, you know, that would prevent us from doing that. And, you know, we hear spit at the thought, you know, it's like disgust, right? Like to actually have that in you, like to spit at the thought of something that's, you know, sinful.
That's a valuable,
be very nice.
State to come. Yeah,
when
like
we eat something that's no gross to you immediately, so it'd be so great if these activities which pull us away from
we
bhakti
already
actually.
experienced it, I think, to a large degree with meat eating. I mean, no one here is thinking, oh boy, I'm really missing that. No one.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of goes quickly, especially because you have prasadam, you know, to give you a higher taste.
So it'd be nice if anger felt that way when it arose, you know, or other things. You just immediately, you know, you could reject that way. So that was just a nice thought of a way to look at it. Oh, I should have a distaste for this. Oh, I'm actually disgusted by this. This isn't worth contemplating. And the other question, false ego, and I know the Sanskrit definitions are so great. So I'm just wondering, like, so it's ahankara?
No, ahankara.
And is that negating hankara? False? Is the A on there? Is there a word hankara that A is negating?
No. Ahamkara is part of the first part of that word is aham. Aham, I. And kara, I'm the doer. The concept that I'm the doer and controller and enjoyer. Ahamkara. You see what I'm saying? So that's false ego, because it's focused in the body, you know. And and when that expands, as we just heard, pungsastriyamatuni bhavametan, then it includes the wife, which you identify. Oh, this is my wife, and these are my kids, and look at, you know, they look like me even, you know. And it becomes, and then the money has to be there, the relatives, the house, the job, all of that is an expansion of this false ego. And at the last line it says, janasya moho yamaham mameti. All of these things generate, janayati, this sense of I and mine. It deepens it much, you know, you become very entrapped and stuck in that. So that, you know, that's why he's saying, you know, that's why sex life is so much controlled or eliminated, because that's the gateway to entrapping yourself very much in this ahankara.
So a compound word, aham and kara.
Yes,
so what
kara means the doer.
What's real ego then? What would you add to aham to make?
Well,
what would be? I know we're kind of creating a word here, but what? That's a false word. I am the doer. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
aham bhakta.
I'm the servant.
Okay.
I'm the servant.
I was thinking aham seva, but aham bhakta. Okay.
Yeah, we'll apply to the dictionary people and see if we can get that into it. Okay, Dan, you're on then. You're on, Vijay Krishna.
Thank you, Dravida Prabhu. So I had two questions, but I guess kind of just to bounce off of Tyler's ego. Not his ego, but an idea of ego. So being the finest of the energies. Well, not the spirit is more finer, I'm guessing, than the ego.
Being the
finest.
You're talking about Rishabh, the word Rishabha?
No, ego. Like you said that you have the material body, then you have the mind, and then you have the subtle. Yeah,
oh, fine. I mean, like more and more subtle.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, so the spirit would be more subtle, or is that like because it's a different energy?
Oh, the fear, where would that fit in?
No, the spiritual energy. Because you said there's two types of energy, material and spiritual.
Spiritual ego, yes.
And so spiritual ego?
Well, yeah, because the idea is that, I always think of a verse, and then I forget half the verse. Atakshri Krishna Nama Di Nabavegra Yamindriya Sevan Mukha Hijivado Swayameva Spuratyada. I got it right. So Prabhupada quote this verse all the time. It's quoted in the purport in the Gita. With these materially contaminated senses, we cannot see the first spiritual form of Krishna. You know. But when we begin serving Him, beginning with the tongue, chanting the name, tasting prasad, then eventually become purified. Krishna reveals Himself. So the real ego is that I'm an eternal servant of Krishna. The word is Sarup. Sanatana Swami asked Lord Chaitanya at the beginning, who am I? Why am I suffering? If I don't know these things, what, they call me as a learned man, I don't know anything. He's taken that role. So Lord Chaitanya answers after a few verses, says, very important verse, Jivera Swarupoi Krishnera Nityadas. Krishnera Tatasta Shakti Beda Bed Prakash. So the first line is the most famous. The Sarup, the real form and real ego or self of the soul, is to be an eternal servant of Krishna. The living entity is the marginal entity. This is all part of our Sarup, is eternally the marginal energy of Krishna. Meaning that we're his energy, and we can be established in this spiritual world at his lotus feet as servants, as a natural state. Or we can turn away from him and absorb ourselves in matter and get a material body and go through what we're going through now. That means marginal. And Beta Beta Prakash, this is Chincha Beta Beta. We're simultaneously one with Krishna and different from Krishna. We're one with him in the fact that we're spiritual, we have his qualities in minute degree, but we're different in quantity, just like the drop of water in the ocean. So that's real ego. And you prove it by acting on the basis of that. Oh, if I'm Krishna's servant, then everything I do should be to please him. Just like the hand doesn't have its own idea what to do. I want to do this, I want to do this. We're supposed to be Krishna's hands and limbs, to serve his desires. Then that really brings real happiness. That's the paradox. You want to be really happy? Forget about your own happiness. Just think of Krishna's happiness. And you'll find yourself floating in an ocean of bliss. You want to be miserable? No, nobody wants to be miserable. But well, otherwise, you can be concerned with the pleasures of your own senses and mind and become miserable, because it's an unnatural state. It's trying to enjoy spiritual happiness. We're looking for that Satchidananda, but we're looking in the wrong place. And in a limited temporary body, which, believe me, after a certain time, it becomes a source of misery. I mean, I'm not quite there yet, but I'm waking up with, where did that pain come from? What's happened? But there's always the nectar shlokas. Hare Krishna. Okay, Vijay, go ahead. You there still? Gave up on me.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, please. You're on.
Yes, Dravida Prabhu. Thank you very much for your indispensable class. Prabhu, the quote from the translation is, quote, "My heart is also spiritual, and I always think of the welfare of my devotees," end quote. So my question is, why is it that the concept of spiritual is always linked with the concept of always thinking of the welfare of the others? And I'm asking like this because the process of Krishna consciousness, when it is taken by the devotee, it is in a way, if I may say it, a very selfish process, because we have to think about our own advancement. So where is there time available in order for me to be worried about the others?
This is not a trick question, right? I'm starting to think that.
No, it is not a trick question.
Okay, all right. Well, that's more or less what I was mentioning. The idea is that Krishna is the supreme enjoyer, right? I mean, that's kind of a given in Krishna kind of understanding. But what is the nature of that enjoyment? I was just reading, it's amazing, chapter 4 of the Adi Leela of CC describes why Krishna came as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, And so there's the internal and external reason. The external reason is to spread the Sankirtan movement, But that's also certainly out of love for us. Why would he come here? Is there no Sankirtan in the spiritual world? Yes, there is. But we need it. We don't have it. And we're also his parts and parcels. We're his intimate friends and children. In other words, he has unbreakable love for us, for all living entities. So there's many different considerations, but he comes down in order to spread Krishna consciousness, basically through the chanting, and show by his example, right? That's the external reason. But then he has his own reason for coming, where he wants to enjoy from himself from Radharani's point of view. First of all, he wants to understand the glory of her love, which he can't understand as Krishna in the spiritual world. He wants to understand himself. He wants to appreciate his beauty and qualities as she experiences uniquely through the lens of her unlimited love. And he wants to understand the bliss she's feeling, loving him and being loved by him. And so on that basis, Krishna comes as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But when you study that, you see that the pleasure there is not selfish, in that he's going to be giving so much bliss as well. When he comes down and teaches Sankirtan, he's enjoying like anything. You read Chaitanya Charitamrita. But at the same time, he's spreading this incredible bliss by turning everyone into ecstatic bhakta, prema bhakti. So the idea is that real happiness comes for the living entity, especially because we're part and parcel of Krishna, by giving pleasure to the whole. Now it's interesting that it is said that Krishna even says, greater than serving me is serving my devotees. Right? Shiva actually said that. Parvati, what's the greatest worship? Oh, Aradhanam Sarvesham Vishnu Aradhanam Padam Tasma Padatanam Devi Tadiyanam Samarchanam. That it's always paradoxical. It says the greatest worship is worship of Vishnu. Greatest. But greater than that, what happened? Greater than that is worshiping his worshipper, serving him. Now why is that? Because it's more pleasing to Krishna. That's why. Because he is more delighted to see that his devotee is being exalted and glorified. Lord Chaitanya would himself glorify his devotees with 5 mouths, as if he had 5 mouths, because he's getting great pleasure from it. So you see, in the spiritual world, the real pleasure comes, and we get an inkling of it here. Perfect example of a mother taking care of the child. So the child is so small, doesn't even know there's a human being there. It's just But if the child is safe and happy and warm and well fed, and gives a little smile, the mother's day is made. So she's enjoying because the child is safe and happy and joyful. So that's a bit pure, but it's limited. It's not pure. But that's really what bhakti is all about. Is taking pleasure in giving Krishna to others, taking pleasure in giving pleasure to Krishna by serving him and glorifying him, and especially by bringing others to Krishna. So because the family is increasing, now someone else is saved, another of my children has come back, You can see, this is just the opposite. That's why we have that verse, and I'll end here. Atmendriya vritti vancha tare balikam. Krishnandriya vritti icha dare prem nam. The desire to satisfy one's own senses, and that is extended, as we learn from Rishabhdev, through the wife, through the family, through the children, through the money, through the nation. That can also be expanded as yourself, but that's still kama. It's still kama. And the desire to please Krishna's senses is prema. That's where we want to be. It doesn't mean you lose these senses. It means they become so purified that you can feel spiritual pleasure with these senses by seeing the deity, glorifying the Lord, and glorifying the devotees, doing everything, sweeping the floor, remembering Krishna unlimitedly. So that's the idea, is that my heart, my heart is also spiritual. I always think of the welfare of my devotees. So Krishna has that love for his devotees, and that impels him to preach, to come down, and to create Dharma. And on that note, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari.
Thank you very much, Dravida Prabhu. Spectacular answer to my question.
Yeah. Haribol Vijay. Vijay Krishna. Haribol Vijay.
Haribol Prabhu.